Hi, I'm Ashton, and the last couple videos I made were more structured, higher effort, and I'm working on a couple more longer, higher effort videos right now. So I wanted to give myself a bit of a break, make this one kind of easier for myself, and just make a book video where I know less people will watch it, but I will still enjoy it, and hopefully those of you that watch it will also still enjoy it. So today I'm going to be talking about leftist fiction, something that I actually get a lot of requests to talk about, believe it or not. But first, I do have a bit of an announcement. When this video goes up, my online store will be open. If you want to buy zines, patches, or pins from me, those are all there. Please keep in mind that it is not a traditional merch situation, so I will run out of things. And unfortunately right now, I can only ship to the US. I am new to this, please be nice to me. One of the zines is a pre-order so that I know how many that I should print / how many I can afford to print. But if you are interested in any of my zines or patches or pins, then check it out. It is graveyardpansy.square.site and it will be linked in the description for you to peruse. So you're the first to know. Are you excited? I'm a little excited. I'm nervous. Anyway, regardless, because I talk about books online and talk about leftism online, I've cultivated a bit of a bubble that enjoys both of those things, shockingly enough. And every time I talk about books, people ask me if I know about leftist fiction, or if I've read any leftist fiction, or if I like any leftist fiction. And I'm here to tell you the answer to that. The answer is no. End of video. No. I do have some leftist fiction to recommend to you today, and that is what we're going to talk about. I do mostly read nonfiction. I tend to prefer nonfiction, but I am still one to enjoy a fiction book every once in a while. I've been sitting on this video idea for at least a year, but I keep thinking there's this book that I haven't read and this book that I haven't read, but I think that's going to go on forever because my TBR is just massive and huge, and I'm never gonna get through it, and I just have to accept that about my life. So I've just decided to make this video anyway, and there are books that I haven't read. There's always gonna be books that I haven't read, but that also leaves plenty of room open for if you have recommendations for leftist fiction for your peers or for me. Let me know, put them in the comments. I would love to hear your recommendations. I'm also only going to talk about books that I like, and obviously tastes differ. Just because I didn't like a book doesn't mean that you won't like it, and just because I like a book doesn't mean that you won't dislike it. So keep an open mind, obviously reading anything. I hope I don't have to tell you that. I'm gonna start with some sci-fi fantasy books and some speculative fiction. I'm gonna talk about some horror, some realistic fiction, and then I'm going to talk about what I'm gonna call stepping stones into nonfiction, and I'll talk a bit more about that when we get there. But first, obviously, I need to discuss a little bit, at least, what it means for fiction to be leftist. Because not everyone is going to see that the same way, and that's totally fine. That's not a bad thing. For me, I consider any work of fiction leftist when it meaningfully engages with left of center ideas. And by left of center, I do not mean US Democrats, I mean anarchist, communist, abolitionist ideas. Some people are really hardcore about what they consider leftist fiction, the author has to be an avowed communist or whatever. I don't think that's necessarily productive. Not all of the books that I'm going to mention are by people that from my knowledge are always anarchists or whatever. But just like when I read nonfiction, I want my fiction to engage with something in a thoughtful way. And typically that way goes further than, Republicans bad. I do think that pretty much any book, if you really excavated it, could potentially lend itself to a leftist analysis or whatever, but all of the books that I'm talking about today have some sort of inherent leftist bend. That's what I'm considering leftist fiction. And I will get a bit into the specifics of what that means for each book when I talk about each book. This is not based on any hollow notions of representation. There are books that I've read with great representation that are not on this list because even though they have representation, they don't meaningfully engage with anything that I would consider a leftist idea. Having a bisexual character or having a indigenous character does not make a book leftist. And similarly, none of the books I've included are included just because they are banned. There's a lot of discussion around banned books, as there should be. I don't think books should be banned. However, the books that are banned for political reasons are not leftist books for the most part. I've read quite a handful of especially the queer books that are frequently circulated as we need to protect these books from being banned. And honestly, a lot of them I think are just mediocre at best. Some of them I think are not good at best. And I'm not going to talk about those today because they are not leftist books. They don't fit the bill for me. They just don't go far enough. And that's the case for a lot of things that I read. I'm a very critical reader. You will know this if you follow me. Okay, I think I've rambled enough. We are starting off strong with some sci-fi, fantasy, and speculative fiction. Sci-fi, fantasy, and speculative fiction in a lot of the books that I am discussing really just overlap. So I'm talking about them as one category rather than trying to separate them when, I don't know, I think genres are not as helpful as some people think they are, but sci-fi, fantasy, and speculative fiction. Let's start off with Fledgling by Octavia Butler. I adore this book. I think it is so fun. It centers around a main character who wakes up in a cave and realizes slowly that she is a vampire, or an Ina. Shori, the main character, is visibly a young black girl, but is actually like a vampire in her 50s, which automatically means the book deals with race and age and the way that people perceive her in a very interesting way. It has a really lovely found family dynamic. It a little bit gets into transformative restorative justice because the way that the Ina society, the vampire society, functions does not have a court system in the way that human society does. They don't have prisons in the way that a human society does. And it's very interesting the way that Butler constructs the society of vampires who live symbiotically with humans. Fledgling also has a very strong disability narrative. It has a very strong care ethic, interdependence narrative. It's just a delight. I don't know if I've recommended it online before, but it is definitely one of my favorite contemporary-ish. It came out in 2005. Vampire novels. The other Octavia Butler book on this list is Kindred. Kindred is a time travel sci-fi fantasy novel, and I don't typically like time travel, so the fact that I'm recommending it should mean a lot. It deals with race and American history and family and love and so many different things in really complex and interesting ways. I think Octavia Butler has a wonderful writing style, and I am very excited to read more of her work in the future, but Fledgling and Kindred are the only two that I've read, and therefore the only two that I can recommend, but I am recommending both of them. So the next two books on my list are also by the same author, The Bluest Eye and Love, both by Toni Morrison. The Bluest Eye is heart-wrenching and horrifying and definitely not something that is fit for everyone to read, but it is beautiful and it is really well written and it is very meaningful in terms of beauty standards and how they map onto and interact with racism. It also deals with sexual assault, religion, a lot of really heavy topics, but they are handled, in my opinion, very well. Love is the only other Morrison book that I've read, although obviously more are on my list. Love tells the story of various different women's relationships with one man, and it's a really interesting examination of how power, both patriarchal power and monetary power and just male privilege in general, can impact relationships in various ways. Neither of these Morrison books are maybe traditionally considered leftist literature, but I think the way that she writes and the way that her stories deal with racism and deal with the world in general are really insightful and definitely worth reading, especially for white leftists. My next two recommendations are Pet and Bitter by Akwaeke Emezi. These are more recent than the last four books that I've talked about. They're both magical realism, fantasy, futurism, post-revolution, abolitionist stories. That would be my way of characterizing them, I suppose. They both have really wonderful messages about family dynamics and found family and how people fit into revolution. Pet I read a while ago, but it's generally considered a YA, but it is kind of also horror adjacent, but it's really good and I would definitely recommend it. The way that Emezi deals with justice especially is really, really powerful, I think. Pet definitely deals with some heavy topics, and like every other book on this list, if you need specific trigger warnings for anything, I would definitely recommend looking those up before reading any of these books. But Pet is still absolutely wonderful, great writing, and Bitter I read more recently. Bitter is even more explicitly leftist than Pet is. It literally quotes Mariame Kaba in it. There are a bunch of really, really cool references to contemporary abolitionist literature. Both of these books are set in the future. Pet came out first, but Bitter is set before it. It's like a prequel to an extent. It has really interesting discussion about the role that art can play in the revolution and how communities form and how communities can protect each other and how not everyone belongs on the streets all the time and that's okay, and how we can take care of each other and how friendships can turn into more revolutionary things and harm reduction, and can people change, and how much can people change, and how can we trust people, and how do we deal with billionaires? Really, really interesting questions, and some of them are like answered pretty convincingly. Would definitely recommend both Pet and Bitter. Those are two of my favorite contemporary YAs, I think. My last book in this section is one that you probably have not heard of, and that is The Membranes by Keith Hawe. I read this recently. It was first published, I believe, in 1995-ish, and then it was translated into English a couple times, but the most recent one was in 2021, and that's the edition that I have. This book hits so hard, and it hits even harder knowing that it was written in the 90s. It is wildly accurate in the way that it predicted the way the world would become. It's set underwater in a futuristic era impacted by climate change, so everyone had to move underwater, which, you know, we're getting there. So I really want to reread Membranes because I've only read it one time, but it feels like one of those books, literally as soon as I finished it, I was like, I need to read this again because there are so many little twists and turns that make so much sense but are still not predictable. But the main character, Momo, after meeting her mother, has like kind of an identity crisis almost, and it very much questions gender boundaries, like the ideas of self and reality and what makes a person, and the twists are incredible. Everything about this book drew me in. It's very short. I think it's a novella, but highly recommend. Next, we're going to talk about horror. I only have 4 books in this section, but we are starting with Manhunt by Gretchen Felker Martin. You've probably heard of Manhunt. It is relatively controversial. I personally really liked it. It is a post-apocalyptic, body horror, splatterpunk, T for T. Manhunt is really gory. There's a lot of gore, but it is really interesting gore. Manhunt is set in a post-apocalyptic world where everyone with a testosterone-dominated hormonal system turns into what is essentially a zombie. And the leads are 2 trans women who hunt men for their testicles. There's some really interesting leftist implications in this one in terms of like healthcare, as well as just general like futurist ideas about who gets to survive. I've definitely seen some talk recently in leftist spaces about how like rich people are prepared for shit. Like they know what's going on. They are also scared about like climate collapse and everything, but because they have enough money to survive it, they're not as worried. And I think this book does a good job about like kind of illuminating that. The next horror that I would recommend is maybe more of a thriller, but it's When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. It deals with gentrification in a really horrifying way. The main character is Sydney, a black person living in a historically black neighborhood in Brooklyn, a neighborhood that is being gentrified. And the gentrification itself is the monster almost in like the horror trope. It's really interesting and it deals with it in a really fascinating way. And I think horror by marginalized people especially has such a wonderful potential for like examining the horrors of capitalism and shit. I will say I did not like the romance. I did not think it needed to fit in there, but I'm pretty sure everything else that Alyssa Cole has written is romance, so I can't judge her too much for that, but other than that, I thought it was worth reading. In a similar vein of horror by black people that examines anti-black racism, we have Lakewood by Megan Giddings. Lakewood deals with medical racism and experimentation in a way that is so scary, and so it feels like it gets you from the inside. Like I was like, oh, this isn't scary. And then as I kept reading, I was like, okay, we are going places. Places are being gone to. It deals with how debt and poverty are exploited by various different institutions in the United States. This video is making me want to reread all of these things when I have so much to read that I haven't read yet, and I can't do that. The last one in my horror category is Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado. I would read anything by Carmen Maria Machado. Her Body and Other Parties is a collection of short horror stories by Carmen Maria Machado. Typically, her work deals with race and gender and sexuality and a handful of other things, but those are the 3 like main things. The only short story in this collection that I didn't like get was the one that retells SVU episodes, but that's because I've never watched a single SVU episode in my life, and that will not be changing. So, you know, I can take or leave that one, but everything else was really lovely. Okay, on to my final fiction section, which is realistic fiction. The first thing on my realistic fiction subsection is Dykes to Watch Out For by Alison Bechdel. It is a comic, not a book, but what can you do? I read the book syndication of it called The Essential Text to Watch Out For. There are a bunch of other ones, but The Essential is the one that I have read everything in. I will say the text to watch out for is more politically relevant to the time that it was written in. However, if you are knowledgeable about general queer history, it will definitely teach you a lot and definitely will feel relevant to you. Text to Watch Out For, because it's a comic, deals with like practically everything under the sun, from like having kids in a lesbian relationship, bi lesbians, trans lesbians, protests. There's a lot in there. There's a lot in Text to Watch Out For, and it's all absolutely delightful. Alison Bechdel does incredible comic work, and if you haven't read any of her stuff, then I don't know what you're doing watching this video, because you have some reading to do. My other realistic fiction recommendation is Stone Butch Blues. This is recommended a lot. However, there is a reason it is recommended a lot. It is heavy. Again, a lot of the books on this list are heavy, and you should definitely look up some trigger warnings if you feel like you might need them. I'm not even going to say anything else about Stone Butch Blues because so much has been said about it, and it is what it is. You can read it for free online. It's an important book, and it deserves to be read. There are a couple of books that I have not read, but are like highly regarded in terms of leftist fiction that I wanted to mention. One of them is Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower. I felt like it would be kind of obvious because I did mention other Octavia Butler books, but that one is commonly regarded as good leftist fiction, as well as anything by Ursula K. Le Guin. I have not read anything by Ursula K. Le Guin. I would like to, but again, I have a lot to read, and I've not been reading as much recently because I have so much other shit to do. I did scroll through my TBR to see if there was like anything else that I would put on my list of leftist fiction that I haven't read but would tentatively recommend, and I started laughing because it's like 99.9% nonfiction, so that was not a very helpful resource for me, but you know, it is what it is. So now I want to talk about my stepping stones into nonfiction. So when I get the question of like, what are your leftist fiction recommendations? Frequently people will say that they want that sort of recommendation because they just can't read nonfiction, or it doesn't hold their interest, or it's boring to them. And that's totally valid and fine. But those same people are oftentimes like, I wish I could read nonfiction. I have a lot of advice on this, but one of the main things that I will say is that the easiest way to read nonfiction is find something that you are really interested in. If, for example, you're into art history, maybe you would like It Was Vulgar and It Was Beautiful by Jack Lowry. That's one of my favorites. There's an example for literally every interest, but if you have an interest, there will be a nonfiction book about it, and more likely than not, there will be a nonfiction book about it with a leftist bend that you will be able to find, I promise you. But there are two genres that I find particularly helpful as like stepping stones for reading nonfiction when you are someone who is a fiction reader, more or less, right? And the first one is memoirs. Memoirs are really, really great stepping stones because they have compelling characters and really strong story arcs. And those are two of the things that a lot of people like about fiction that they don't think they can get in nonfiction, but you can. You can. Here's a little speed run of some memoirs that I recommend. Zombie by Audre Lorde. Absolutely one of my favorites. I've read it like 3 times. Really good. 7 Miles a Second by David Washington-Rowick. We Both Laughed in Pleasure by Lou Sullivan, one of my favorites of all time. Alice Wong's Year of the Tiger, Carmen Maria Machado's In the Dream House. And finally, Living Queer History, Remembrance, and Belonging in a Southern City by Samantha Rosenthal. That one is a mix between memoir and like other forms of nonfiction, but it is still really wonderful, and I think it is under-recommended, so I am recommending it to you. My other piece of advice for reading nonfiction when you don't want to read nonfiction is anthologies, especially if you borrow an anthology from a library or a friend or wherever. You don't have to read the full thing. Anthologies are made of essays, right? So you can read one essay and you are still learning something, and it's still important and good, but you are getting a fully formed idea without having to read like an entire book. It's great. I am someone who reads anthologies cover to cover, I'll admit it, but not everyone is. And if you are someone who struggles to read nonfiction, one really good way to do that is read through the table of contents of an anthology, find something that really piques your interest, and read it. And then you've read like 20 pages or whatever, but it's a full, complete thought, and you don't have to read the whole book to do it. Some anthologies that I recommend, if that seems up your alley, are No Tea, No Shade, New Writings in Black Queer Studies, edited by E. Patrick Johnson, who's also edited a number of other anthologies. Disability Visibility, First-Person Stories from the 21st Century, edited by Alice Wong, again, sorry. It Came from the Closet, Queer Reflections on Horror, edited by Joe Valise. This one is especially good if you are a horror enjoyer in terms of your fiction reading or watching. They definitely talk about horror films in that book too. Against Equality, Queer Revolution, Not Mere Inclusion, edited by Ryan Conrad. That is another one of my all-time favorites. Reference it all the time. Really great variety of essays, really great variety of ideas. And Queering Anarchism, Addressing and Undressing Power and Desire, edited by like 5 different people, including C.B. Daring and Abby Volcano. That's another one where almost every essay in that book is a hit, but generally I would recommend it and I think it's pretty good. Those are all of my thoughts for now. Again, if you have fiction or nonfiction leftist reading recommendations, feel free to drop them in the comments. All right, I hope that you are reading something good right now, and if you're not, maybe now you have something good to read. Go to your local library, check out the Libby app if you don't have it already. Not sponsored, just a really great resource, and I will talk to you later, maybe.